Get out of my house, you pathetic loser. Serafina screamed, her voice so sharp it sliced through the grand dining room. 5 minutes. That's all you have. After that, I don't care if security drags you out by your neck. Before I could answer, she stormed around the table, seized the handle of my travel suitcase with both hands, and hurled it across the polished marble floor. The crash exploded through her enormous mansion. The heavy suitcase slammed into imported Italian stone with a sickening thud that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Crystal glasses rattled. Silverware jumped. Even the smug classical music drifting from hidden speakers seemed to disappear beneath the violence of that single impact. Then she leaned over the table, close enough for me to smell her expensive perfume, and sneered through perfectly whitened teeth. You've always been the embarrassment of this family. A broke little tech geek pretending to matter. Pick up your garbage and disappear. I didn't move. I looked at my battered black suitcase lying on the cold marble like it belonged to someone who had already lost everything. Then I looked at my parents. My mother didn't stop her. My father didn't defend me. Instead, he threw his head back and laughed. Actually laughed. He leaned comfortably into his custom-upholstered leather chair, clapped his hands together like he was watching the funniest performance of his life, and said, "That's my girl." Someone finally had the courage to throw the failure out. The entire table erupted into smug smiles. Not one person spoke for me. Not one person asked if I was okay. To them, I was nothing more than the family disappointment they had been waiting years to erase. They expected tears. They expected begging. They expected me to crawl across that marble floor, apologize for existing, and leave with whatever dignity they hadn't already destroyed. Instead, I smiled. Not a wounded smile. Not an angry smile. A cold, empty smile that made Serafina hesitate for the first time that evening. Without saying a word, I reached inside my coat and slowly placed a thick, overstuffed manila file onto the gleaming mahogany table. The sharp crack of the folder hitting the wood was somehow louder than my suitcase striking the floor. Red wine continued dripping from the overturned crystal glass beside it. No one touched the file. No one breathed. I looked directly into my sister's eyes. "You don't have 5 minutes anymore," I whispered. "You have 1. Confusion replaced her arrogance. My father frowned. My mother's smile vanished. Because they all believed the suitcase lying on the marble contained nothing more than a few cheap, wrinkled clothes belonging to a washed-up tech nerd who had failed at life. None of them realized it contained something infinitely more dangerous. Inside that suitcase was the financial death warrant for every single person sitting at that table. But to understand why that one sentence drained every drop of color from their faces, you need to understand the poisonous atmosphere inside that dining room long before my suitcase ever hit the floor. The insult burned. The humiliation was deliberate. The room smelled of roasted duck, black truffles, and my mother's overpowering floral perfume. Hidden speakers filled the mansion with soft classical music, as if elegance could disguise decades of cruelty. Yet beneath the polished silver, the imported marble, and the perfect family image, everyone at that table was seconds away from losing everything they believed they owned. My mother, Genevieve, sat proudly at the head of the long dining table. She raised her hand, the one heavy with a massive diamond ring my father had bought her after his last big corporate bonus, and covered her mouth as she let out a mocking, delighted chuckle. It was a high-pitched, cruel sound that I had heard a million times throughout my childhood. Her eyes danced with a vicious, unadulterated kind of joy. She was thoroughly enjoying the spectacle of my humiliation. My father, Roland, sat directly across from her. He looked at me with the exact same deep, festering disgust he had reserved for me since I was a little girl playing with discarded motherboards and tangled wires in the dusty garage. "It is about time someone finally put you in your proper place, Maeve," my father said, his voice dripping with immense, overwhelming satisfaction. The venom in his tone was palpable. "You come into your sister's beautiful home, you eat her expensive catered food, you drink her vintage wine, and you have the absolute audacity to question her highly intelligent business decisions? 5 minutes is far too generous, Serafina. Honestly, if it were my house, I would have told her to get out right this very second." I would have thrown her out into the street myself. Serafina stood towering over me at the end of the table. Her chest was heaving aggressively under her designer silk blouse, her face flushed red with a mixture of fake, righteous anger and deep, hidden panic. Her husband, Thaddeus, sat quietly beside her, meticulously adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit and checking the face of his luxury gold watch. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his dark red wine with a detached, highly amused expression on his face. He was a spineless coward, a man who married into what he thought was massive wealth, and he was perfectly content to sit back and watch his wife verbally abuse her younger sister. They looked exactly like a glossy magazine cover for the perfect, wealthy, untouchable American family, sitting safely inside their exclusive, highly guarded gated community. But I knew the absolute truth behind the designer clothes, the expensive catering, and the ridiculous luxury cars parked in their heated, three-car garage. There was nothing behind those perfectly painted walls but deep, festering, unrecoverable rot. I did not reach down to pick up my things. I did not show them a single ounce of the blistering, agonizing rage currently tearing through my chest like a runaway freight train. For years, for my entire miserable existence in this family, I had been the ultimate outsider. I was the constant, embarrassing disappointment, the weird, quiet one who never measured up to Serafina. Serafina was the golden child, the perfect, radiant daughter who could do absolutely no wrong in their blinded eyes. I had endured their passive-aggressive, snide remarks at every single rare holiday dinner I forced myself to attend. I had swallowed their insulting, degrading questions about my career choices, and I had sat in pure silence through their endless, exhausting boasting about Serafina's latest commercial real estate acquisitions. But this argument tonight was entirely, fundamentally different. This was not about petty sibling rivalry. This was not about childhood jealousy or fighting for our parents' twisted affection. This was about Grandma Alma. This was about the only legacy that actually mattered in this cold, superficial world, and I was not going to let them destroy her memory just to save their own pathetic, fraudulent skins. 5 minutes, Maeve, Serafina repeated, her voice dropping to a dangerous, vibrating whisper. She pointed a perfectly manicured, slightly trembling finger toward the heavy, custom oak front door at the end of the grand hallway. Take your pathetic, antisocial tech nerd attitude and get the hell out of my house. The property is mine now. The entire inheritance belongs to me. A probate judge signed off on it. The demolition crew is already scheduled for next week. The permits are cleared. You lost. You have always been a loser and you will always be a loser. I slowly, deliberately shifted my gaze away from my screaming sister and looked directly at my mother. Her eyes held absolutely zero maternal warmth. There was no concern, no hesitation, no shock over the fact that her eldest daughter was aggressively throwing her youngest out into the dark night. There was only blind, rabid loyalty to her favorite child. I looked at my father, who was already casually reaching across the table for another piece of artisan bread, completely and utterly unfazed by the emotional violence he had just actively encouraged. They really, truly thought they had won this war. They deeply believed they had successfully manipulated a dying, vulnerable old woman, forged a fraudulent, disgusting legacy, and pushed me out of the picture permanently. They thought I was just the weak, quiet little sister who would run back to California with her tail tucked between her legs, crying about how unfair the world was. They did not know that for the past 6 agonizing months, I had been operating entirely in the pitch-black shadows. They did not know that I had utilized the massive, unlimited resources of my multi-million-dollar cybersecurity firm in Silicon Valley to ruthlessly map out every single dirty, hidden secret they had ever tried to bury. I was not the victim sitting at this table. I was the executioner. The imaginary clock was ticking down in that suffocating room. Would they realize their fatal mistake before the final second dropped, or would they smile as they walked straight off the cliff? Growing up in our house meant living every single day under a very specific, totally unbreakable hierarchy. Serafina was the undisputed queen, the beautiful heir apparent to whatever imaginary, aristocratic throne my parents thought they possessed. I was the lowly, invisible peasant allowed to exist purely in the cold shadows she cast. While other normal, healthy families celebrated both of their children, recognizing their unique strengths and different paths, Genevieve and Roland treated Serafina like a blue chip, guaranteed financial investment. They treated me like a burdensome, annoying tax penalty they were forced to pay every single year. The contrast in our childhoods was so sharp it physically hurt to remember. Serafina was the beautiful, popular cheerleader. She was the prom queen, the debate club president, the girl explicitly destined for high society, a wealthy husband, and a corner office in a glass skyscraper. My parents aggressively, joyfully drained their savings accounts to fund her expensive private tutors, her elite summer tennis camps, and a massive college fund at a prestigious university. On her 16th birthday, they threw a massive catered party and surprised her with a brand new, shiny red sports car with a giant white bow on the roof. I, on the other hand, was incredibly quiet, deeply introverted, and intensely curious about how digital networks and complex systems actually worked. I did not care about designer dresses or country club gossip. I liked sitting on the cold concrete floor of the garage, taking apart broken hard drives, building rudimentary servers from scratch, and writing complex, endless lines of code on a clunky, second-hand desktop computer I had bought myself by saving up my lunch money for an entire year. My father frequently stood in the doorway of my small bedroom, leaning against the frame, shaking his head in pure, unmasked disgust as he watched me type. He called my coding a pathetic, embarrassing waste of electricity. He told me I was ruining my eyesight for a hobby that would never pay the bills. My mother often reminded me, usually loudly and intentionally in front of her wealthy friends who came over for afternoon tea, that unless I learned how to dress properly, do my makeup, and get a real job with a steady corporate salary, I would end up a total loser, living in their basement forever. They humiliated me at every single turn. They systematically built a museum of pain in my mind, where every exhibit, every memory, was just another instance of being forcefully pushed aside so Serafina could shine brighter. The only true, safe refuge I had in this entire world was Alma's Culinary and Supply. It was a dusty, dimly lit, absolutely magnificent store owned and operated by my grandmother Alma. The store was a massive staple of our local community, sitting on a prime corner of downtown. It always smelled deeply and wonderfully of rich vanilla bean, sharp cinnamon, toasted almonds, and the old, polished wood of the antique glass display cabinets. Grandma Alma was the exact polar opposite of my superficial parents. She had rough hands from years of hard work, a warm, genuine smile, and a heart made of solid gold. She did not care one bit about designer labels, imported cars, or exclusive country club memberships. She cared about honest, exhausting work. She cared about looking out for her neighbors, offering credit to struggling bakers, and building a community. "You have a builder's mind, my sweet Maeve," Grandma would tell me constantly. We would sit together in her cramped, messy back office, completely surrounded by towering stacks of paper invoices, dusty recipe books, and jars of rare spices. I would spend my weekends helping her modernize her chaotic, outdated inventory system by building a custom, digital database from scratch. She would stand behind my chair, resting her heavy, warm hand on my shoulder, giving it an affectionate, reassuring squeeze as she watched the code scroll across the screen. "You see exactly how things connect. You have a beautiful system in your head. Do not ever let your parents tell you otherwise. You are going to build incredible things." When I turned 22 years old, I made the monumental, terrifying decision that officially fractured my relationship with my immediate family for good. I decided to pack up my meager, cheap belongings and move entirely across the country to Silicon Valley to launch my own cybersecurity startup. When I announced this terrifying plan at the formal dinner table, the reaction from my family was absolutely brutal and swift. My father violently threw his linen napkin down onto his plate. "You are throwing your entire life away, Maeve," he had yelled, his face turning an angry shade of purple. "You are going out there to play on computers with a bunch of lazy dropouts. Do not come crying to me when you are homeless on the streets of San Francisco." Why cannot you just be normal? Why cannot you be more like your sister? Serafina had just laughed, sipping her sparkling water. Good luck paying rent with your little computer games, she had sneered. Just do not expect us to wire you cash when you go broke. I did not ask for a single dime. The evening before I boarded my cheap, economy flight to California, I walked through the quiet, familiar streets of my hometown to say a final, tearful goodbye to Grandma Alma. The shop was mostly dark, illuminated only by the warm glow of the streetlights outside. She hugged me so incredibly tight, her old bones feeling fragile against my chest, but her spirit feeling stronger than ever. Before I pulled away, she reached deep into her faded flower-stained apron pocket and pressed a thick, heavy paper envelope into my trembling hand. Inside was exactly $5,000 in crisp, newly printed bills. It was a massive chunk of her personal life savings. "Build your empire, my sweet, brilliant girl," she whispered, her kind, wrinkled eyes shining brightly with unshed tears. "Make them all eat their words. This store, this place, it will always be here for you. It is your legacy when I am gone." Those early years in California were absolute, unrelenting hell. I lived in a tiny, roach-infested apartment with 3 other developers. I survived on cheap instant coffee, dollar store ramen, and pure, unfiltered adrenaline, coding late into the night until my eyes physically bled. But slowly, agonizingly, the tide finally turned. My security software caught the attention of a major tech incubator, and my company took off like an absolute rocket. By the time I was 34 years old, my cybersecurity firm was valued in the multi-millions. I had a beautiful, sprawling home overlooking the hills, a level of complete financial security I had never even dreamed of, and a life I truly, deeply loved. Yet, to my parents and Serafina, whenever I called or visited, I was somehow still the invisible, embarrassing disappointment. Serafina had married Thaddeus, and they constantly, aggressively bragged about their luxury life, their exotic vacations, and her high-profile commercial real estate deals. I never corrected them. I never showed them my bank statements. I just let them talk. But my ultimate, unbreakable anchor to that town was always Grandma Alma. I called her every single Sunday morning. We talked for hours about the store, her recipes, and my business. But then, about a year ago, a terrifying shift happened. Her strong voice grew noticeably weaker. She sounded confused. And then, suddenly, the calls simply stopped going through. The operator told me the line was disconnected. When I asked my mother, she brushed me off. I was terrified. Why was my only lifeline to a family suddenly, violently severed? What were they hiding from me? Exactly 6 months ago, my cell phone rang violently on my nightstand at 2 in the morning. It was my mother. Her voice echoing through the speaker was completely flat, entirely devoid of any real, recognizable human emotion. It sounded like she was reading a grocery list. "Maeve, your grandmother passed away in her sleep last night. The funeral is scheduled for this coming Thursday at the town cemetery. Wear a black dress. Do not embarrass us." The entire world simply dropped out from under me. All the air violently left my lungs in a single, crushing rush. I sat on the edge of my large, empty bed in the pitch dark of my California home, the cold phone pressed hard against my ear, completely unable to breathe, to speak, or to comprehend what she had just casually stated. "I am booking the first flight out," I finally choked out, hot tears instantly streaming down my face, dropping onto my lap. "I will be there by tomorrow afternoon. I will come straight to the house." There was a very strange, incredibly heavy pause on the line. Then, I heard a faint, rustling sound, as if my mother had quickly pulled the phone away from her mouth but carelessly failed to press the mute button on her screen. In the dead, absolute quiet of my dark bedroom, I clearly, unmistakably heard her whisper to someone standing right next to her. A voice that sounded exactly, perfectly like Serafina answered back in a harsh, hushed tone. "Thank God. I am so glad we got it sorted out before that little brat got back here to ruin everything." The line went dead with a sharp, aggressive click. I sat there for a very long time, completely frozen, staring blindly at the glowing screen of my phone. A terrible, freezing cold shiver began at the base of my neck and raced aggressively down my spine. Got it sorted? What in the absolute world did that mean? The crushing, suffocating grief of losing my grandmother was overwhelming, threatening to completely drown me in a sea of sorrow. But beneath the hot tears, a tiny, incredibly sharp alarm bell began to ring loudly and persistently in the back of my analytical mind. I packed my darkest, most conservative suit, booked a miserable red-eye flight, and headed back to the toxic, suffocating town I had successfully fled a decade ago, totally and completely unaware that I was walking straight into a meticulously planned, deeply evil trap. The sky over the town cemetery on the day of the funeral was the color of bruised, heavy iron. It was spitting a cold, miserable, relentless drizzle that soaked right through the shoulders of my dark wool coat, chilling me to the absolute bone. The funeral service for Grandma Alma was packed to the absolute edges of the green cemetery tents. She was a deeply beloved institution in this town, a woman who had quietly helped hundreds of people over the decades. As I stood at the very edge of the open, muddy grave, watching the polished, heavy wooden casket slowly lower into the dark earth, I felt entirely, devastatingly hollow inside. Just a few feet away from me stood my immediate family, performing a masterful, award-winning theatrical production of grief for the watching townspeople and the local wealthy elite. Serafina was holding a massive, expensive black umbrella over herself and Thaddeus, subtly dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I knew in my gut those tears were completely, entirely manufactured. She was wearing a designer black morning dress and a pair of dark sunglasses that likely cost more than a reliable used car, looking perfectly, beautifully tragic. My mother leaned heavily, dramatically on my father's arm, sobbing quietly into a lace handkerchief and eagerly accepting heartfelt condolences with practiced, delicate grace. They completely, utterly ignored me. They barely even acknowledged my physical presence. I was a ghost at my own grandmother's funeral. As the large, somber crowd slowly began to disperse toward their warm cars to escape the freezing, relentless rain, an older man in a faded, slightly oversized gray suit shuffled slowly over to me. It was Wallace. He was the dedicated, hard-working general manager who had loyally worked alongside Grandma Alma at the culinary supply store for over 20 years. His weathered, kind face was incredibly pale, and his eyes were deeply red-rimmed and swollen from hours of genuine crying. "Maeve," Wallace rasped, reaching out and gripping my freezing, wet hand with surprising, desperate strength. Before I could say a single word of comfort, he quickly darted his eyes around, looking nervously over his shoulder to make absolutely sure Serafina and my parents were walking far out of earshot toward their luxury SUVs. He reached deep into his damp coat pocket, pulled out a crumpled, slightly torn piece of paper, and shoved it directly into my palm. He leaned in incredibly close, his breath shaking against the cold air. "She cried for you every single day, Maeve," he whispered, his voice cracking with intense, raw emotion. "She begged to hear your voice. She sat by the window waiting for you. Why did you stop calling her? Why in God's name was your phone number suddenly disconnected?" I felt a sudden, violently sharp pain explode deep in my chest, as if someone had just plunged a knife between my ribs. "What are you talking about, Wallace?" I asked, my voice trembling uncontrollably, the rain mixing with the tears on my face. "I called her every Sunday. I never missed a week. But her home line went completely dead months ago. Mom said the phone company was having issues in her neighborhood." Wallace shook his head slowly, looking deeply confused and incredibly, profoundly sad. "Serafina came into the store. She told all of us that you changed your number, changed your email, and completely blocked the entire family. She explicitly told Alma, while she was lying in her bed, that you were just too busy with your fancy, important California tech life to make time for a dying old woman." The freezing, damp air was knocked completely, violently out of my lungs. I stood there totally paralyzed, staring down at the fresh, dark dirt piled next to the grave. The jagged, ugly pieces of the puzzle were rapidly, sickeningly beginning to click together in my analytical mind, forming a horrifying picture. They had purposefully, methodically isolated her. They had intentionally cut her off from me. They had let her die in the dark, believing I did not care. What other monstrous, unforgivable lies had they spun in the shadows while I was thousands of miles away? The true, terrifying depth of their calculated, cold-blooded betrayal did not become fully, undeniably clear until 2 agonizing days later. We were all sitting in the stuffy, outdated, wood-paneled offices of Mr. Montgomery, the long-time, incredibly boring family lawyer. The cramped office smelled strongly of stale, burnt coffee, decaying legal paper, and cheap carpet cleaner. My parents, Serafina, her silent husband Thaddeus, and I sat in heavy, cracking leather chairs arranged in a tight semicircle facing his massive, cluttered oak desk. Mr. Montgomery aggressively cleared his throat, nervously adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he looked down at the thick, bound stack of papers labeled as the last will and testament of Alma. I want to be completely clear, I was not sitting in that stuffy room for the money. I had plenty of my own money sitting in diversified offshore accounts and tech stocks. I was sitting there because Grandma Alma had firmly, repeatedly promised me, ever since I was a teenager helping her build databases, that Alma's culinary and supply would be mine to protect, manage, and run. We had spent countless hours drawing up detailed, exciting blueprints to preserve the historic brick storefront while completely updating the back-end global supply chain. It was our shared, beautiful dream. It was her ultimate, undeniable legacy. "Let us get straight to the primary asset of the estate," Mr. Montgomery said, his voice a dull, practiced monotone, though a massive bead of nervous sweat was visibly forming on his wrinkled forehead. "The commercial property and the business entity officially known as Alma's Culinary and Supply, according to the recently revised will, which was signed, officially witnessed, and dated exactly 14 days prior to her passing, the entirety of the estate, including the physical store, the massive inventory, and the highly valuable downtown land it sits on, is left solely and exclusively to her eldest granddaughter, Serafina." The entire, stuffy room violently spun around me. The floor felt like it was dropping out from under my feet. I gripped the thick, worn leather armrests of my chair so hard my knuckles instantly turned bone white, my fingernails digging into the seams. I was absolutely, totally certain I had misheard the old man. "Wait. Stop. What did you just say?" "That is legally impossible," I said, my voice cutting sharply through the stale air, echoing off the walls lined with heavy law books. "Grandma and I talked extensively about the store transitioning to my direct ownership just 6 months ago. She already had it strictly in writing in her previous will. We had a verbal and written agreement. Why on earth would she suddenly change it?" Serafina let out a heavy, incredibly dramatic, exaggerated sigh. She shifted comfortably in her expensive, tailored seat, crossing her long legs and smoothing her skirt. "Maeve, please. I am begging you to grow up for once in your life. Do not make this harder on Mom and Dad than it already has to be. We are grieving." Grandma simply changed her mind. As her mind sadly faded in her final weeks, she realized the absolute truth. She was deeply, profoundly disappointed that you completely abandoned this family to go play startup games in Silicon Valley. She explicitly told me she wanted the store to go to someone who actually stayed rooted in this local community. Someone who is financially responsible and knows how to handle commercial real estate. Financially responsible? I shot back instantly, my voice rising sharply, entirely losing my carefully maintained composure. "You have not set foot inside that supply store since we were children, Serafina. You hate the smell of flour, you despise the working class, and you have never done a hard day of manual labor in your entire privileged life. You hate that store and everything it stands for." My father immediately, violently slammed his heavy hand down on the arm of his chair, glaring at me with pure, unmasked hatred. "Watch your damn tone right now, Maeve," he shouted, his face turning an angry, blotchy red. "Your grandmother finally woke up from her delusions and realized who was actually there for her in her final, painful days." Serafina took valuable time off work from her busy firm to manage her daily medical care. Serafina held her hand. You just made a few convenient, cheap phone calls from your California mansion when it suited your busy schedule. The legal decision is made, it is properly witnessed, and it is final. Accept your defeat and move on with your life. I slowly turned my head and looked directly, intensely at Mr. Montgomery. The supposedly respectable lawyer absolutely refused to meet my eyes. He stared intently, nervously at the finalized, stamped paperwork resting on his desk, his frail hands trembling very slightly as he shuffled the pages. His intense physical discomfort and sheer panic were palpable in the small room. A revised will, signed a mere 14 days before her unexpected death, handled entirely and exclusively by the sister who had actively, maliciously isolated her from the outside world. It was a textbook setup. I did not scream at them. I did not throw a childish, dramatic fit, flip the heavy oak desk, or threaten to sue them right then and there. I simply stood up, slowly buttoned my dark suit jacket, picked up my purse, and looked down at my older sister. The triumphant, incredibly smug, arrogant smirk plastered across Serafina's perfectly contoured face was all the confirmation my analytical gut needed. This was not a tragic, sad family misunderstanding. This was a highly coordinated, deeply evil criminal heist. "Congratulations on your inheritance, Serafina," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing, dead, terrifying calm that made Thaddeus actually flinch in his seat. "Enjoy it while it lasts." I turned on my heel and walked out of that suffocating, corrupted office. I did not drive back to the airport. I knew my sister was a manipulative, pathological liar, but I also knew she was incredibly greedy. And greedy, arrogant people always, without fail, make massive, sloppy mistakes. The only question now was, exactly how deep did this financial rot go, and who exactly helped her dig Grandma Alma's grave? Instead of driving to the airport to catch my flight back to the sunny safety of California, I drove my rental car straight to a nearby, run-down, incredibly cheap motel located on the extreme, forgotten outskirts of town. I checked into a quiet, depressing room under a fake name, locked the flimsy door, pulled out my highly encrypted corporate laptop, and immediately initiated a massive, secure background protocol. I utilized my cybersecurity company's vast, unlimited global network and shadow resources to find the absolute best, most ruthless, and most discreet private investigator operating in the entire state. I needed someone who specialized exclusively in severe elder abuse, complex corporate fraud, and vicious probate litigation. Within exactly 3 hours, my lead security engineer had made the connections and hired Harrison. Harrison was a decorated, highly feared former federal financial crimes investigator who now operated a high-end, extremely discreet private detective agency catering to the ultra-wealthy. The next 3 agonizing, endless weeks were an absolute masterclass in practicing controlled, burning, psychological agony. While I flew back to California to manage the daily operations of my tech company, forcing myself to smile in board meetings and keep up the highly convincing facade of the defeated, grieving, completely oblivious younger sister, Harrison went straight to work in the dark shadows of my hometown. He pulled bank records, tracked burner phones, and intimidated the right people. And what his aggressive investigation rapidly uncovered was far more sickening and far more desperate than I could have ever possibly imagined in my absolute worst nightmares. I flew back to my hometown in absolute secret, again using a fake alias, to meet with Harrison and his newly acquired star witness, Nurse Hazel. Hazel was a soft-spoken, deeply exhausted, traumatized woman in her late 50s who had been formally hired through a local medical agency to provide in-home palliative care for Grandma Alma during her final, difficult months. We met in the highly secure, dimly lit conference room of Harrison's unmarked, brutalist downtown office building. It was raining heavily outside, the dark water lashing violently against the thick tinted windows. Hazel looked absolutely terrified. She was anxiously twisting a shredded, wet tissue in her shaking hands as she sat across the heavy wooden table from me. "I need you to tell Maeve exactly, word for word, what you confessed to me yesterday, Hazel," Harrison prompted her gently, reaching out and turning on a small, silver digital voice recorder, placing it squarely in the center of the table. Hazel took a deep, shaky, ragged breath, looking at me with tired eyes full of deep, haunting, soul-crushing remorse. I am so incredibly sorry, Maeve. I should have spoken up to the state medical board or the local authorities so much sooner, but your sister, Serafina, she cornered me in the hallway. She threatened me. She told me she had powerful, expensive corporate lawyers on retainer and that she would have my nursing license permanently revoked, ruin my family's life, and bankrupt me if I ever dared to interfere with her private family matters. Tell me exactly what Serafina did to my grandmother in that house, I said, my voice eerily, unnaturally calm despite the violent, explosive rage boiling like hot battery acid in my veins. Your sweet grandmother. She talked about you constantly, every single waking hour, Hazel began, a heavy, sad tear slipping down her wrinkled cheek. She loved you so incredibly much. But Serafina gave me extremely strict, written, undeniable orders. Absolutely no phone calls were to be put through to her bedroom. Serafina physically intercepted all of your letters and care packages from the mail carrier and threw them straight into the garbage outside. Serafina sat by Alma's bed for hours and repeatedly, cruelly told her that you had stopped calling because you were just too busy making millions of dollars, that you thought she was a burden, and that you simply did not care about her anymore. Underneath the heavy wooden table, my hands clenched into fists so incredibly tight that my fingernails dug deep into my palms, drawing tiny, warm drops of blood. They had not just stolen her physical assets and her real estate, they had brutally, maliciously stolen her peace of mind. They purposefully, intentionally let a good, kind woman die in sheer emotional agony, fully believing her favorite granddaughter had callously abandoned her. It gets significantly, horrifyingly worse, Harrison interjected, his voice gravelly and serious. He slid a thick stack of highlighted, certified medical documents across the polished table toward me. Look closely at the daily medication administration logs from the final month of her life. Hazel pointed a trembling, frail finger to a specific, highlighted entry dated exactly 14 days before Grandma's death. Alma was on a very standard, highly regulated, low-dose pain management routine. But the exact week the lawyer, Mr. Montgomery, was scheduled to come to the house to sign the papers, Serafina explicitly, verbally ordered me to double her dose of strong liquid painkillers and to simultaneously administer a heavy, completely unprescribed, black market sedative she brought in herself. Serafina loudly claimed to the agency that Alma was in excruciating physical pain and acting violently agitated. I knew it was way too much heavy medication for her frail, 80-year-old body. It made her incredibly confused. She hallucinated badly, talking to people who were not there. She did not even know what year it was, Maeve. She could barely hold a pen, let alone read a complex legal document. And that is the exact, specific day Mr. Montgomery came to execute the brand new will, I said, staring blankly at the dates printed on the paper, feeling physically sick to my stomach, ball rising in my throat. The puzzle pieces locked together with devastating, undeniable, crystal-clear clarity. Serafina had intentionally, criminally drugged our grandmother completely out of her mind, completely stripping her of her cognitive faculties and legal autonomy, and physically guided her trembling hand to sign away her entire life's legacy. Why did she need the culinary store so badly? I asked, looking up at Harrison, my mind racing to find the logical motive. It makes enough money to survive comfortably, but it is not a massive, multi-million-dollar goldmine. Why risk decades in federal prison for a bakery supply shop? Harrison did not say a single word at first. He just smirked grimly, a cold, predatory smile, and slid another, much thicker, heavy black binder toward me. I opened it and started rapidly reading the forensic financial summaries, the heavily audited bank statements, and the internal corporate memos that his team had painstakingly, illegally compiled over the last 3 weeks. The absolute truth hit me like a physical blow to the head. Serafina was completely, hopelessly, utterly broke. Her extravagant, upper-class, Instagram-perfect lifestyle, The luxury sports cars, the endless designer wardrobe, the exorbitant country club memberships, it was entirely, 100% funded by a massive, fragile, crumbling house of toxic debt. "She is drowning, Maeve," Harrison finally said, tapping the financial ledger. Her commercial real estate firm took out a massive loan to fund a luxury condo project that completely failed. She is sitting on exactly $12 million of toxic debt. The primary lenders are aggressively initiating a margin call next week. If she does not miraculously produce $4 million in liquid cash, they will seize everything, and she will likely face federal indictment for defrauding her investors. The only way out was to steal a completely debt-free commercial property sitting on prime downtown real estate, your grandmother's store, and sell it immediately to a corporate developer for quick cash. She is preparing to jump off a financial cliff, and she used your grandmother as a parachute. I closed the black binder, feeling an icy, terrifying smile slowly spread across my face. I did not want to just call the police. I wanted to completely destroy her. If you are enjoying this story of uncovering dark family secrets and preparing for the ultimate payback, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below with the name of the city you are living in. Every single comment helps this video reach more people who might need to hear this. Thank you so much for your support. I sat in that dimly lit, heavily secured conference room, staring at the thick, black binder resting on the heavy wooden table. The rain continued to violently lash against the thick glass of the windows, but inside my mind, there was only a terrifying, absolute silence. The kind of silence that precedes a massive, devastating explosion. Harrison, the seasoned private investigator, watched me closely. He had seen countless families tear each other apart over money, but the sheer, cold-blooded malice of what my sister had done to our grandmother was entirely different. It was not just greedy, it was purely irredeemably evil. Serafina was completely broke. Her entire life, the life my parents had constantly thrown in my face as the ultimate standard of success, was nothing but a fragile, crumbling illusion built on $12 million of highly toxic, unrecoverable commercial debt. She needed $4 million in liquid cash to survive a margin call, and she was perfectly willing to chemically torture our 80-year-old grandmother to steal her debt-free property and get that cash. You have enough solid, undeniable evidence right here in this binder to go straight to the district attorney, Harrison said quietly, breaking the heavy silence. He tapped his silver pen against the medical logs. We have Hazel's sworn, legally binding affidavit. We have the illegally altered medical records proving severe drug-induced incapacitation. And we have the certified bank statements proving imminent bankruptcy and the financial motive. The district attorney absolutely loves a high-profile, slam-dunk elder abuse and real estate fraud case. Serafina will face real, hard time in a federal penitentiary for this. But I have to warn you, Maeve. Once you pull this trigger, once you hand this over to the police, there is absolutely no going back. Your family will be completely, publicly destroyed. The scandal will be on the front page of every local newspaper. I slowly looked up from the documents, meeting Harrison's serious gaze. I do not want to go back, I said, my voice as hard and cold as stone. They are not my family. They destroyed that illusion themselves the moment they let her die thinking I did not love her. Burn it all down, Harrison. But as I drove back to my cheap motel room that night, the rain slicking the dark roads, a different, much darker plan began to form in my analytical mind. Simply handing the evidence over to the police and sending Serafina to prison for fraud felt entirely too easy. It felt passive. If she went to jail now, my parents would inevitably spin the narrative. They would play the victims. They would claim Serafina made a terrible mistake under intense business pressure. They would never truly understand the absolute, suffocating helplessness that Grandma Alma felt when they took her phone away and trapped her in her own mind. I did not just want Serafina to go to a sterile federal prison. I wanted to break her. I wanted to thoroughly, methodically dismantle her entire existence using the exact same financial weapons she worshipped. I wanted her to feel the exact same utter, terrifying helplessness she had inflicted on the only person who ever truly loved me. So, I did not call the police. Not yet. Instead, I opened my encrypted corporate laptop and initiated a highly secure video call with my chief financial officer back in Silicon Valley. I utilized my cybersecurity company's vast, liquid capital resources and made a very quiet, incredibly aggressive business move through a proxy holding company based in the Cayman Islands. It took exactly 4 days of relentless, aggressive negotiations. My high-powered corporate attorneys approached the primary commercial lenders who held Serafina's massive, failing $12 million loan. Those banks were absolutely desperate to offload the toxic debt, fearing a total loss. Through my anonymous shell company, I offered to buy the entirety of her debt portfolio at a slight premium, strictly in clean, untraceable cash. The banks eagerly agreed. By Friday afternoon, the final massive wire transfers cleared the international banking system. I closed my laptop, a slow, genuinely terrifying smile spreading across my face. I had officially secured my ultimate weapon. I did not just have the medical evidence to send her to jail. I had literally bought her life. I was now her sole, absolute creditor. I personally held the heavy mortgages to her multi-million-dollar mansion. I held the titles to her luxury cars. I held her completely in the palm of my hand, and she had absolutely no idea that the invisible tech nerd she had mocked her entire life was now the legal owner of her fake empire. All I needed now was the perfect moment to drop the guillotine. And right on cue, as if the universe was eager to watch her burn, my cell phone buzzed on the cheap motel nightstand. It was an email from Serafina. Maeve, the email read, dripping with fake, sickening sweetness. Mom and Dad feel terrible about the tension and how things ended at the lawyer's office last week. We are family, and we should not let silly business matters divide us during this time of grief. Come over for a nice family dinner at my house this Saturday evening. Let us put the past behind us, heal our wounds, and move forward together. I stared at the glowing screen and let out a dark, completely humorless laugh. They did not want to move forward. They wanted to ensure I was not secretly planning to contest the fraudulent will in probate court. They wanted to pacify me, feed me an expensive steak, and keep me quiet while they finalized the dirty sale of the culinary store to the corporate developers next week. They wanted to literally bulldoze Grandma's life's work into dust while smiling in my face. I typed out a single, simple word and hit send. Absolutely. I spent the next 24 hours printing every single damning document, every financial ledger, every medical log, and carefully organizing them into a massive, heavy manila file folder. I packed the explosive evidence into my scuffed black travel suitcase. I was ready. Saturday evening arrived. The air was thick and humid. I dressed in a sharp, tailored charcoal suit, grabbed my heavy suitcase, and drove my discreet rental car through the pristine, aggressively manicured streets of Serafina's exclusive gated neighborhood. I pulled up the long, sweeping circular driveway, parking my modest sedan right next to Thaddeus's gleaming silver Porsche and Serafina's massive luxury SUV. I walked up the wide stone steps to the towering front door. The physical weight of the suitcase pulled heavily on my arm, but the emotional weight of my grandmother's memory pushed me relentlessly forward. I pressed the glowing doorbell. I was walking directly into the eye of the storm, perfectly, chillingly calm, because I knew with absolute, mathematical certainty that I was the one bringing the lightning. Which brings us right back to that suffocating, ostentatious dining room table. To the violent sound of my suitcase hitting the floor. To the venomous words spitting from my sister's mouth. To my parents laughing and clapping at my humiliation. And to the 1-minute warning I had just dropped like a live, ticking grenade right into the center of their perfect, wealthy lives. The 1-minute countdown had officially begun. The heavy, suffocating silence that instantly descended upon that grand dining room was so absolute, so incredibly dense, that you could clearly hear the faint, rhythmic ticking of the expensive antique grandfather clock standing out in the hallway. I sat perfectly still in my custom chair, my posture completely relaxed, my hands resting calmly on the white linen tablecloth right next to the massive, overflowing manila file folder I had just slammed down. I took a slow, deep breath and simply looked at the faces of my biological family. The smug, entitled arrogance that had defined their entire existence, the arrogant smirks they had worn just seconds before when Serafina threw my luggage, were slowly but surely melting away. In their place, a creeping, icy dread of the terrifying unknown was beginning to take root. They had invited me to this extravagant dinner tonight for one specific reason. They wanted to gloat. They had meticulously set this beautiful, oversized table with pristine crystal wine glasses, polished heavy silver cutlery, and catered, overpriced French food just to put on a grand, theatrical show of their utter dominance over my life. They wanted to finally push me out of the picture, brag about how they were going to sell Grandma Alma's precious legacy to the highest corporate bidder, and laugh about my defeat over $100 bottles of wine. They thought I was trapped in their house. They did not realize I was the one who had permanently locked the doors from the outside. My mother, Genevieve, was the very first one to try and regain control of the rapidly deteriorating narrative. She nervously reached up and adjusted the heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone, sitting up a little straighter in her chair as if her perfect, practiced posture could somehow protect her from reality. She forced a highly unnatural, incredibly condescending smile onto her face, treating me exactly like a misbehaving toddler who had just thrown a tantrum in a high-end grocery store. "Maeve, what on earth are you doing?" she asked, her voice carrying that painfully familiar, scolding tone she had always used to belittle me when I was a child. "You are acting completely hysterical, darling." Serafina lost her temper, yes, and throwing your bag was perhaps a bit uncalled for, but you absolutely provoked her. You came into her beautiful home, you ate her food, and you insulated her. Put those ridiculous papers away right this instant. We are your family. We love you. We are not going to sit here and be threatened by some silly file folder you probably printed off the internet just to cause unnecessary drama. My father, Roland, quickly chimed in, his face flushing a deep, angry shade of red. He leaned heavily forward, placing his elbows on the table, and aggressively pointed his silver steak knife directly at me. "Your mother is absolutely right, Maeve. You are completely embarrassing yourself. You think you can waltz back into this town with your fake California tech money and intimidate us? You think you are smarter than everyone else in this room? Serafina is the legal, fully documented executor of your grandmother's estate. A county probate judge already signed off on the official paperwork weeks ago. It is a legally binding, completely finished deal. Whatever fake, amateur investigation you think you ran is entirely meaningless in the real world. Now, pick up your little suitcase and get out of my sight before I call the local police department and have you physically arrested for trespassing and harassment." I did not blink. I did not raise my voice to match his aggressive, booming shouting. I simply reached out, flipped open the heavy cover of the thick manila folder, and calmly pulled out the very first stack of heavily redacted documents. "Let us talk about the strict legal concept of estate executors, Dad," I said, my voice echoing coldly and clearly off the polished marble walls, cutting through their pathetic bluster like a freshly sharpened razor blade. "And while we are at it, let us talk about severe medical fraud." I slid a heavy, stapled packet of papers across the polished mahogany table, pushing it directly towards Serafina until it stopped right next to her spilled red wine. "Those papers sitting right in front of you are the certified, legally subpoenaed daily medical logs from the private in-home care agency that provided nursing services for Grandma Alma during her final month of life," I stated clearly. Serafina stared down at the papers. She did not reach out to touch them. Her hands remained completely frozen near her plate. The healthy, vibrant color was rapidly draining from her perfectly tanned, contoured face, leaving her looking incredibly sickly, pale, and genuinely terrified. Thaddeus, her materialistic husband, stopped checking his watch. He leaned over slightly to look at the documents, his perfectly sculpted eyebrows furrowing in genuine, unscripted confusion. He clearly did not know the full, horrifying extent of the crimes his wife had committed in the dark. "I did not just run some amateur internet investigation, Dad," I continued, making deliberate, unblinking eye contact with my older sister. Her chest was rising and falling rapidly now. I hired a premium private investigator. I hired a decorated, former federal financial crimes investigator. He spent the last 3 agonizing weeks ripping your entire hidden life apart. Serafina, we sat down in a highly secure conference room and conducted a fully recorded, legally binding, sworn interview with Nurse Hazel. Do you remember Hazel, Serafina? She is the quiet, terrified woman you aggressively cornered in the hallway. She is the woman you explicitly threatened to strip of her state nursing license, promising to completely ruin her career and her family if she ever dared to speak to the authorities about what you were forcing her to do behind those closed bedroom doors. You are lying, Serafina stammered, her voice suddenly losing all of its booming, arrogant authority. She swallowed incredibly hard, a single bead of sweat forming at her perfect hairline. Hazel is a deeply disgruntled, crazy former employee. I fired her because she was totally incompetent and stealing medication. Anything she told you is a complete, malicious fabrication designed to get back at me. Is it a fabrication that you completely, intentionally disconnected Grandma's home phone line so she could not call out for help? I asked, my voice rising just a fraction, the years of righteous, burning anger finally beginning to bleed through my calm, calculated facade. Is it a fabrication that you physically stood at the front door like a prison guard and illegally turned away her lifelong friends? You turned away Wallace. You told everyone she was far too tired to see anyone. You aggressively isolated her from the entire world. You personally intercepted the mail carrier and threw my handwritten letters straight into the outside garbage can. You purposefully let that kind, gentle woman sit in a dark room completely alone with her fading memories, fully believing that I had callously abandoned her. You psychologically tortured her, Serafina. My mother let out a loud, highly dramatic gasp, clutching her chest with both hands as if she had just been physically struck. Maeve, how dare you? How absolutely dare you accuse your own flesh and blood sister of such horrific, evil things? Serafina sacrificed her valuable time to care for Alma. Mom, I shot back instantly, pointing a firm finger directly at the medical logs resting in front of Serafina. Look at the specific dates highlighted in bright yellow ink on page 4. Read them out loud. On the exact week that Mr. Montgomery, the family lawyer, came to the house to execute the brand new, highly suspicious will, Serafina illegally verbally ordered the nursing staff to administer a massive double dose of liquid painkillers along with a heavy, completely unprescribed sedative. Grandma was totally and completely incapacitated. The professional medical logs state clearly and unequivocally that she was suffering from severe drug-induced dementia and horrifying hallucinations. She lacked any legal or mental capacity to sign a basic grocery receipt, let alone legally alter a decades-old will that dictated the future of a highly valuable commercial real estate property. The massive dining room went completely, terrifyingly silent once again. The only sound in the room was the heavy, labored, slightly wheezing breathing of my father. Roland slowly looked down at the papers. His eyes began scanning the highlighted sections. He was a ruthless, emotionally distant man, but he was not an idiot. He could read the undeniable, legally binding proof sitting right in front of his face. The reality of the situation was finally piercing his thick skull. Serafina violently slammed both of her hands down on the table, officially breaking the silence. It proves absolutely nothing. She yelled, sheer, unadulterated panic completely taking over her formerly beautiful features. She looked like a cornered, desperate animal. She was an old woman in immense physical pain. I was simply managing her comfort levels. I made a difficult family judgment call to help ease her suffering. You cannot possibly prove in a court of law that I administered those drugs specifically to manipulate the signing of the will. I do not have to prove it, Serafina, I replied, my voice dropping back down to a lethal, freezing whisper that commanded the entire room. Because Grandma Alma already proved it for me. I reached back into the open file folder and pulled out a small, silver digital audio recorder. I set it gently on the table, right next to the spilled wine. It was the exact same voice recorder I had bought for Grandma 3 years ago as a Christmas present. I had specifically told her to use it to record her amazing baking recipes and stories about the history of the town, so I could listen to them whenever I missed her voice in California. I reached out, pressed the play button, and ensured the volume was turned all the way up. The unmistakable sound of Grandma Alma's voice instantly filled the cold dining room. It was incredibly weak, heavily slurred from the heavy narcotics and full of immense, heartbreaking confusion. "I do not understand this, Serafina." Grandma's recorded voice echoed through the room, sounding so incredibly tired and frail. "Why do I need to sign this paper again? Maeve and I already fixed all the legal paperwork for the business. Maeve is going to take over the store." "Where is Maeve? Why is not my girl answering her phone? Please, let me call her." Then, clear as a bell, cutting through the static, Serafina's voice came through the small speaker. It was sharp, highly impatient, and incredibly, sickeningly cruel. "Maeve is gone, Grandma. She does not care about you anymore. I keep telling you this. She is way too busy making millions of dollars out in California to worry about a dusty old bakery shop. She explicitly told me on the phone last week that she does not want the business. Now just hold the pen and sign the paper right here on the dotted line. Montgomery needs this done today, so we can protect the property from the state taxes. Stop being difficult and just sign it so you can go back to sleep." I reached out and hit the stop button. The silence that followed the recording was heavy enough to crush solid bone. My mother stared blankly at the small silver device in absolute, total horror. The undeniable, recorded reality of what her golden, perfect child had actually done in the dark was finally violently crashing down on her carefully constructed delusions. Her lower lip trembled uncontrollably. My father slowly looked over at Serafina, his face completely unreadable, a complex mixture of deep shock, anger, and terrifying realization. Now that we have firmly, legally established the severe elder abuse, the illegal medical manipulation, and the blatant, undeniable probate fraud, let us move on to the actual motive, I said, my voice completely steady. Looking directly at Thaddeus, who was now visibly trembling in his chair and staring at his wife as if she were a complete stranger. Because as my investigator told me, greed always, without fail, leaves a very clear paper trail. I reached into my heavy file folder one more time. The entire atmosphere in the room had dramatically shifted from defensive, mocking arrogance to sheer, suffocating terror. Serafina looked exactly like a condemned prisoner standing on the trapdoor of a wooden gallows, just agonizingly waiting for the executioner to pull the heavy lever. Her breathing was incredibly shallow and rapid. She kept nervously darting her eyes toward the grand front door, as if her mind was frantically calculating the physical odds of simply jumping up from the table and running away into the dark night. I pulled out a second, much larger stack of documents. These were significantly thicker than the medical records, tightly bound together with heavy black metal binder clips. They were not handwritten nursing notes. They were certified, deeply complex financial ledgers, heavily audited corporate bank statements, internal company memos, and official commercial real estate foreclosure notices. I slid them directly into the center of the table. "Let us talk about your absolutely perfect, incredibly luxurious lifestyle, Serafina," I said, my voice dripping with absolute, unmasked contempt. "Let us talk about the gorgeous, brand-new SUV parked out in the driveway. Let us talk about Thaddeus's custom sports car. Let us talk about the massive, suffocating mortgage on this sprawling, multi-million-dollar mansion. The incredibly expensive monthly country club dues. The extravagant vacations to Europe." Thaddeus looked down at the thick stack of financial documents. His hands were shaking so violently that he could barely manage to reach out and flip open the heavy cover page. "You see, Mom and Dad always loudly praised Serafina for being the brilliant, unmatched financial mind of this entire family," I continued, standing up slowly and pacing quietly behind my chair, watching them squirm. "They relentlessly mocked me for working in the tech industry, while they constantly celebrated Serafina for building real, tangible wealth in the cutthroat world of commercial real estate. But my private investigator did not just stop at the medical records. He pulled the actual, certified, unedited financial records for your investment firm. Your company is not building wealth, Serafina. Your company is an absolute fraud. It is a hollow, crumbling shell built entirely on a foundation of massive, incredibly high-interest debt. Shut your damn mouth. Serafina screamed, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated desperation. She violently lunged across the wide table, desperately trying to grab the financial documents away from her husband's hands. Thaddeus, do not look at those papers. I am warning you. They are completely forged. She manufactured them. She is just trying to ruin us because she is jealous. I slammed my open hand down incredibly hard on top of the documents, pinning them securely to the heavy mahogany table before her grasping fingers could snatch them away. I glared at her, my eyes burning with the fiery intensity of a lifetime of deeply repressed anger and humiliation. Sit down, Serafina. Sit down right now, I commanded, my voice booming through the room. You have exactly 30 seconds left, and I suggest you spend them listening very carefully. She slowly, agonizingly sank back into her leather chair, looking utterly, completely defeated. Thaddeus's eyes widened in sheer, unimaginable horror as he read the highlighted bottom lines on the certified bank statements. His perfect, wealthy reality was shattering into a million sharp pieces right in front of him. Your firm is completely bankrupt, I stated clearly, enunciating every single syllable, making absolutely sure my parents heard every single word of the truth. Serafina took out a massive, highly leveraged commercial loan from a major national bank to fund a luxury condo development. The real estate market shifted, the zoning permits were delayed, and the primary investors aggressively pulled out their capital. Serafina is currently sitting on exactly $12 million of extremely toxic, unrecoverable debt. She is facing an imminent, legally binding margin call from the primary commercial lender. If she does not miraculously produce $4 million in liquid cash by the absolute end of this month, the bank will seize everything she has ever touched. They will take the cars. They will immediately foreclose on this beautiful mansion. And Serafina will likely face a severe federal indictment for actively defrauding her remaining private investors by hiding the massive losses. My mother began to cry loudly. Not her usual manipulative, delicate fake tears meant to win an argument or gain sympathy. These were real, ugly, gasping, chest-heaving sobs of absolute, profound despair. Her perfect, highly curated reality, her entire elevated social standing in the wealthy community, was evaporating into thin air right in front of her eyes. So, Serafina desperately needed a hard asset to liquidate, I explained to the room, driving the final, heavy iron nail into her coffin. She could not possibly sell her own house because it is heavily leveraged to the roof with second and third mortgages. But Grandma's old store? A massive, completely debt-free commercial property sitting squarely on prime, highly desirable downtown real estate. That was her golden, winning lottery ticket. Serafina made a quiet, illegal, under-the-table deal with a corporate developer. They offered her exactly $4 million in clean cash for the land, but only on the strict condition that the land was completely cleared of any legal ownership disputes and ready for immediate total demolition. That is exactly why Serafina heavily drugged Grandma. That is exactly why she forged the will. She ruthlessly traded our grandmother's life, her dignity, and her lifelong legacy just to save her own pathetic, fraudulent lifestyle from public collapse. Thaddeus stood up so incredibly fast that his heavy dining chair tipped over backward, crashing loudly onto the hard marble floor. He looked down at Serafina with a level of pure, unmasked disgust that was almost terrifying to witness. All the fake love and high society manners were instantly gone. "You told me we were absolutely fine," he hissed, his voice trembling with intense rage and betrayal. "You looked me in the eyes last week and told me the business was thriving. You completely lied to me. Thaddeus, please, honey, listen to me. I was going to fix it." Serafina pleaded pathetically, reaching her shaking hands out toward him across the table. The sale of the store was going to cover the massive margin call. I had the buyer lined up. We were going to be completely fine. I did it for us. "Time is up," I interrupted loudly, my voice cutting through their pathetic marital argument like a freshly sharpened blade. You keep talking about the margin call, Serafina. You keep talking about the bank aggressively seizing your assets. But there is one final, very important piece of the puzzle that you do not have. I reached into the inside pocket of my tailored suit jacket and slowly pulled out a single, crisp piece of heavy, watermarked legal paper. It was an official, notarized transfer of commercial corporate debt ownership. I placed it gently on the table, right on top of the spilled red wine, letting the dark liquid slightly stain the edges. When I discovered through my investigator exactly how deeply in debt you actually were, I said, a slow, genuinely terrifying smile finally spreading across my face, I realized something very important. I realized that simply handing this evidence over to the police and sending you to federal prison for elder abuse just was not enough punishment for what you did to her. I wanted to completely, thoroughly dismantle every single aspect of your entire life. I wanted you to feel the exact same utter helplessness that Grandma felt when you took her phone away. So, I utilized the massive liquid capital resources of my tech company. I had my lawyers create a quiet, entirely anonymous proxy financial holding firm in the Cayman Islands. And 4 days ago, that holding firm aggressively approached your primary commercial lenders. Serafina stared down at the single piece of paper. Her bloodshot eyes widened to the size of actual saucers. The horrifying realization of what I was saying hit her brain like a runaway freight train. She literally stopped breathing. The color completely drained from her lips. "I bought your debt, Serafina," I whispered, leaning all the way over the table so my face was merely inches from hers. "I paid the banks in full, and they legally transferred the entire $12 million financial portfolio directly to my private proxy company. Do you understand what that actually means in the real world? The big bank does not own your house anymore. The bank does not own your luxury cars. I do. I am your sole, absolute creditor. I personally hold the heavy mortgage to the roof over your head. And as the sole legal owner of your massive debt, I aggressively initiated the final margin call this morning. It takes full legal effect on Monday morning at exactly 8 o'clock. The absolute, total destruction of Serafina's massive, fragile ego was a beautiful, deeply mesmerizing thing to watch unfold. She completely, physically collapsed inward. She dropped her head heavily into her hands, her fingers pulling aggressively at her perfect, expensive hair, letting out a pathetic, high-pitched whimpering sound that I had never heard a grown woman make. She was completely, irrevocably broken. My father, the man who had constantly belittled my intelligence and my career my entire life, sat completely frozen in his chair. He looked at me not as a disappointment, but as an absolute, calculating monster he could not even begin to comprehend. I had not just beaten them in an argument. I had legally, financially, and emotionally obliterated their entire existence. Just as I turned on my heel to walk toward the grand hallway, the heavy oak front door suddenly burst open with a loud bang. It was not the police, at least not yet. It was Mr. Montgomery, the esteemed family lawyer. He was completely out of breath, his expensive silk tie loosened, his wrinkled forehead slick with terrified, greasy sweat. He practically stumbled over the threshold and ran into the dining room, desperately clutching a thick leather briefcase to his chest. He took one frantic look at the destroyed dining table, the spilled wine, and the absolute, unmasked horror painted on my family's pale faces, and his legal mind knew exactly what had just happened. "Maeve," Mr. Montgomery gasped, ignoring my parents entirely and walking straight toward me. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold his briefcase. "Maeve, please, you have to listen to me. I received the formal emergency notice from the district attorney's office exactly an hour ago. Your private investigator officially filed the massive elder abuse and financial fraud dossier. The DA is furious. They are officially opening a full criminal grand jury investigation first thing tomorrow morning." Serafina snapped her heavy head up from her hands. "Montgomery, you are my personal lawyer. You have to fix this right now. You have strict client-attorney privilege. You cannot let them do this." Mr. Montgomery slowly turned and looked at Serafina with a level of absolute, unadulterated disgust. The primal instinct for total professional self-preservation had completely taken over the lawyer's mind. I am not your lawyer anymore, Serafina. I formally resign. Client attorney privilege absolutely does not cover the active, ongoing commission of a major federal felony. You completely lied to me. If I had known you were illegally drugging her with heavy doses of narcotics just to steal her highly valuable commercial property, I never would have executed that fraudulent will. I am officially turning over every single piece of written correspondence directly to the district attorney tomorrow morning. I am fully cooperating as a star witness for the state prosecution to save my legal license and stay out of prison. With that final, devastating declaration, Montgomery turned on his heel and rushed out of the house as fast as his legs could carry him. Thaddeus did not waste another single second. He immediately turned around and sprinted up the grand, sweeping, carpeted staircase. I am packing my bags right now, Serafina. He screamed hysterically from the second-floor balcony. I am filing for an extremely aggressive divorce first thing on Monday morning. I am not going to a federal prison because you are a pathetic, broke, lying criminal. In less than 10 agonizing minutes, Serafina had lost her entire fake financial fortune, her high-end business, her luxury home, her strict legal protection, and her marriage. My father finally found his voice. He slowly, shakily stood up from the dining table. His face was pale, completely devoid of its usual booming, intimidating arrogance. For the very first time in his entire life, my father looked small. He looked incredibly weak, fragile, and utterly pathetic. Maeve, my father stammered, holding his trembling hands up in a pathetic, pleading gesture of surrender. Sweetheart, please. Please, just think about what you are doing to us. If you let the police process this massive fraud evidence, Serafina will go to a federal penitentiary for years. The immense public scandal will completely destroy this family's pristine reputation in the entire community. Your mother and I will be total, absolute social pariahs. We will be ruined. We will lose everything we have worked for. I stopped walking toward the door and slowly turned around to face him. I looked directly, unflinchingly into the eyes of the man who had constantly, relentlessly told me I was entirely worthless. You lost everything the very moment you allowed my sister to psychologically torture a dying old woman, I said, my voice absolutely devoid of any warmth, pity, or sympathy. You completely lost your reputation the exact moment you decided to laugh and clap your hands while your golden child physically threw my belongings on the floor. You are not my family. You never were my family. The state authorities will be here early in the morning to execute the search warrants. I strongly suggest you use whatever little money you have left in your savings account to hire a very, very good criminal defense attorney. I turned my back on them forever and confidently walked out the heavy oak front door. The cool, crisp night air hit my face, and for the very first time in 6 agonizing months, I took a deep, clean, unburdened breath. I got into my rental car, started the engine, and drove out of the heavily gated community, leaving my completely destroyed biological family behind in the burning ruins of their own making. True to my absolute word, the heavy hammer of the law fell with brutal, unrelenting speed. On Monday morning at exactly 8 o'clock, my proxy holding company officially executed the massive margin call. When Serafina predictably failed to miraculously produce the $4 million in liquid cash, my lawyers immediately initiated aggressive, hostile foreclosure proceedings. By Wednesday afternoon, loud, heavy repo trucks arrived at the mansion. The entire wealthy neighborhood watched in shocked, gossiping silence as they towed away the luxury vehicles. 2 days later, the district attorney officially moved in. Serafina was publicly, humiliatingly arrested at her fancy office, placed in heavy metal handcuffs in front of all her remaining terrified employees. She was formally indicted by a grand jury on multiple, severe felony charges, including severe elder abuse, grand larceny, and massive probate fraud. Because Mr. Montgomery and Nurse Hazel both officially turned state's evidence and testified against her in exchange for immunity, Serafina had absolutely no legal defense. She eventually broke down and took a heavy plea deal to avoid a lengthy, deeply humiliating public trial, resulting in a strict 7-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. My parents were not criminally charged, as they did not directly sign the fraudulent medical or legal documents, but their lives were completely destroyed anyway. The immense, unavoidable public scandal utterly ruined their social standing. They were officially kicked out of the country club. They were forced to quietly sell their beautiful home just to pay for Serafina's exorbitant legal fees, eventually moving into a small, cramped, depressing apartment on the far outskirts of town. The complex legal process to officially invalidate the forged will took several long months navigating the slow county probate court system. But with the massive criminal convictions already firmly established on the public record, it was merely a necessary legal formality. The fraudulent, manipulated document was entirely thrown out by the presiding judge. And Grandma Alma's original, authentic will was fully, legally reinstated. Taking official possession of Alma's culinary and supply was one of the most incredibly emotional, profoundly moving moments of my entire life. When I finally unlocked the heavy, glass-paneled front door with my own shiny brass key, the familiar, incredibly comforting smell of rich vanilla, sharp cinnamon, and old polished wood hit me instantly, wrapping around me like a warm hug. I stood completely alone in the quiet, dusty aisles, slowly running my hands over the worn, scratched wooden counters, feeling the powerful, undeniable presence of my grandmother everywhere I looked. I did not sell the incredibly valuable land to any greedy corporate real estate developer. I never would. Instead, I heavily invested a significant portion of my own tech fortune into fully restoring the historic building to its former glory. We meticulously kept the charming, vintage brick aesthetic of the front facade, preserving the history of the town, but completely modernized the interior operations. I installed the advanced inventory software my California company had built, completely streamlining their supply chain and bringing the store into the 21st century. My very first executive act as the new official owner was to gather all the original, intensely loyal employees in the back break room. I looked at Wallace, whose wrinkled eyes were filled with heavy tears of absolute joy and immense relief, and I officially promoted him to general store manager. I immediately doubled his annual salary, established a generous retirement fund, and provided full premium health benefits for everyone on the staff. They were not just random, replaceable employees to me. They were the kind, honest people who had actually loved and cared for my grandmother. They were my true family. As the months passed, the newly renovated store thrived beautifully, beyond my wildest expectations. It became a massive, bustling hub for the community once again. We hosted free, highly popular weekend workshops teaching local kids how to bake. We quietly extended store credit to young, struggling families. We operated the business exactly the way Grandma Alma had always intended, with deep honesty, immense compassion, and a true, unwavering commitment to the neighborhood. During this time of intense personal healing, my parents made several desperate, pathetic attempts to constantly crawl back into my life. They sent incredibly long, tear-stained letters apologizing for what they called their temporary lapse in judgment and terrible misunderstanding. They left desperate, sobbing voicemails on my phone, begging me for financial assistance, claiming they simply could not afford their new rent and that their health was failing. I never answered a single one of their calls. I returned all their letters completely unopened, marked return to sender. I realized a profound, life-changing psychological truth during this dark, agonizing journey. I realized that true, genuine forgiveness does not always require a physical reconciliation. I eventually forgave my parents and my sister for being weak, selfish, materialistic people, solely so that I did not have to carry the heavy, toxic poison of their hatred in my own heart anymore. I refused to let their darkness consume my light. But forgiving them absolutely, unequivocally did not mean I had to grant them access to my life ever again. I drew a massive, impenetrable boundary made of solid steel. Blood does not automatically make you family. Shared DNA does not magically give anyone a free pass to abuse you, manipulate you, steal from you, or use you for their own gain. True family is fundamentally built on mutual respect, deep loyalty, and unconditional, selfless love. My family was Wallace. My family was the incredible, resilient community that supported the culinary store. I successfully split my time now between managing my highly successful tech company in sunny California and overseeing the store in my hometown. Every single Sunday morning, without fail, I walk into the quiet back office. I sit down at the very same worn wooden desk. I look at the framed photograph of Grandma Alma smiling warmly at me, and I drink a hot cup of coffee in absolute, beautiful peace. I made something that actually matters, just like she asked me to on the night I left for California. Her amazing, enduring legacy is completely safe, and it will proudly endure for generations to come. The single greatest lesson I learned from this incredibly painful, dramatic chapter of my life was not about the mechanics of business success, the thrill of corporate revenge, or even the deep, satisfying feeling of watching legal justice being served to those who deserved it. It was about discovering the true, unbreakable meaning of a legacy. Grandma understood something profound that my arrogant parents and my greedy sister never ever grasped. A legacy is not just about inheriting expensive commercial property or hoarding millions of dollars in a bank account. It is entirely about your core, unshakable values. It is about how you treat the most vulnerable, defenseless people around you, and about the positive, lasting impact you leave on your community long after you are gone. In the end, finding the immense courage to stand up for what is absolutely right, even when it means going directly against your own blood relatives, can be the hardest, most terrifying, but ultimately the most necessary thing you will ever do in your entire life. Am I too cruel for letting my own sister go to prison and permanently cutting ties with my parents, or was this the exact justice they deserved? Have you ever had to draw a hard, painful line to protect your own peace and sanity from the toxic people who were supposed to love you? Please share your own experiences and thoughts in the comments below. Your decision will be the final verdict for this story. Thank you so much for listening. Do not FO.